excited to have this guest in studio with us today. Ben and I connected almost a year ago and got a really good conversation. He took some valuable time out of his day to instill some, let's see, how do we say that, Dave? Maybe some confidence in me, maybe some direction. And I thought it was a lot of value to where our listeners needed to get it. Shouldn't have taken this long to get them together, but Ben Killoy, I should have asked you, Ben, is that how you pronounce your last name?
Yes, Killoy. You got to go low with it. As long as you remove the R, you really can't say it wrong. But most people throw a Kilroy in there. So as long as you don't do that, you're okay.
Ben has been helping dads break the cycle and create a lasting feeling of change over the last 6 years. He's helped them grow in a way and through generational trauma and redefines it to make sure they understand what it means to be alive. He's a certified dad and life coach, Dave. He grew up on a farm in southern Wisconsin right after high school, joined the Marine Corps, and then he fought the hardest battle of his life, which maybe some of our listeners are fighting themselves, and that's why we've got Ben here to help instill a little bit of confidence. Welcome, Ben. I'm excited, like I said in the beginning, to have you here.
I'm excited, and the term that popped in my mind when I was thinking about our conversation is excavating. That most people don't have real good depth in who they are. They focus outward into the world, and it's that depth that often creates the most change, and it allows us to understand who we are so that way we can decide where we want to go in life.
So, Ben, we're farm in southern Wisconsin. Tell me a little more tie to, you're in Texas now?
No, I'm still in Wisconsin.
You're still
I'm
in
about 30
Wisconsin.
minutes from the family farm still.
Okay.
My dad still farms.
And your dad's still a farmer. Okay. What kind of product are you farming?
So early on, it was pigs and steers, and I often told my dad, like, if something ever happened to you, the pigs are the first thing to go because I hated them. And funny enough, right when I joined the Marine Corps, that's when he got rid of the pigs. And it's also when he upgraded his baler from a regular stacker baler where you need someone in the back to a kicker baler because he didn't have enough help to get the hay up, and he was tired of waiting for people to help him bale. So there was lots of things that happened when I went to the Marine Corps. And he was also counting how many years I had left based on how many falls he was going to be farming by himself as well. So a lot of things were tied to the Marine Corps, oddly enough, as a farmer.
I got you. Well, that's great. And then you're married, and how many kids?
I got 3 kids. My wife's a teacher. I've been married for 12 years now. 3 kids, 10, 8, and 6. 2 girls and a boy in the middle. And I still reside, like I said, here in southern Wisconsin, just 30 minutes from my family farm still.
Perfect.
That is great. Listeners, so the title of this episode is going to be The Business of Fatherhood. That's stolen right away from Ben, but we're going to use it. I'm assuming he's going to give us permission to do as such. And the fun part about this, Dave, is our listeners are in a unique industry. There aren't very many industries that have the opportunity for fathers to work beside sons and daughters, or for mothers to work between their sons and daughters, or even in-laws, to where multi-generational businesses are being run. Obviously, we preach all over the place on this podcast that it's not a farm anymore. It's a farm business. You know, sometimes you get some multi-generational plumbers, Miller and Sons, and you go that route. But there's not very many bankers that work father-son. There's not very many auctioneers, right?
Yep, a handful, but not very many.
So when you look at this profession, Ben, why do you think it's important that we cover a topic like this today, the business of fatherhood? So why, and then what is it?
So the business of fatherhood was born out of my first mission, which was started with military veteran dads. That I started with the simple mission to bring every dad home. That military dads come home physically from war, but we don't come home emotionally. And I want to emphasize that emotional part, because that part is going to tie into what we're going to lead to. And as I was doing military veteran dad for about 2.5 years, I realized that this problem is so much bigger than just military dads. And it's the same problem, just got different language. And I realized that I wanted to start something that would affect all dads. And so I started the Business of Fatherhood, which was a second podcast, which is a short daily podcast. Instead of an interview show, it's just me spitting out advice. And there's over 360 episodes out there with 5-minute advice on how to make your life a little bit better based on all the information that I've absorbed on how to make my life better. And it was this idea of understanding that what most dads don't do is actually come home. Now, even in the irony of growing up on a farm, that is home. But I can tell you that there's a lot of dads that are farmers that emotionally never really walk through that door. They're still working either in the shop trying to figure out the tractor, or they're worried about the crops or worried about the rain. That emotional part, that part that allows them to connect with their kids, their wife, that part is still the most important threshold that most dads don't do. And oftentimes in our mind, we think that this home, this checkbox, is just the mortgage. It's this building that, yes, I am providing a roof, a ecosystem, a set of rooms that my kids can grow up in. But the reality is that's not what creates a home. Home is a feeling that a dad has the opportunity to radiate from the inside out through his presence, his leadership, and his love. That is what creates the feeling of home. And most dads are always looking for it in the wrong place.
So we're talking profitability here, and it might not be just the 1099, Tanner. We're talking more about longevity of multi-generational farms. We're talking multi-generational relationships, and how do we make it so that the next generation wants to keep or stay or work? And I think that has to go with relationships.
Yeah, and we're talking even building wealth outside of financial dollars, right, Ben?
Correct. That your wealth isn't determined by how much money you're leaving in the bank account. Your wealth is determined by the impact you have on your kids. And that's really the only legacy. Like, what we do here on earth is important. What you do with your time, your energy, all of those, your investments, what you build, that's all important. But in the context of father, I double down on what you leave behind is 10 times more important. And the part with anytime we're business owners, and farmers are business owners, whether they're operating a sole proprietor as an LLC or not as an LLC as farming, this idea of understanding that we're not just building land to pass down. Because what I would value more than having 200 acres is something with my dad. That a year from now, 10 years after he's gone, the land will be important. But the memories that I had, the time in the trucks talking about whatever on the way to the market, those are the ones that I'm going to take to the bank emotionally, that I'm going to care about more. But that's often not how our mindset is. And it's often just because our wealth in the United States is defined by possessions and what we do and all these different things and what we collect. But to me, fatherhood is this different idea that's often overlooked, especially when we're part of a business, because the business requires so much of us. But we often start businesses to create freedom. But the irony in that is often it becomes a hell that we can't break free from to get to the family that we wanted to have more time with.
Tanner, to our listeners, if you're an avid listener, you're going to want to wait till the end of the podcast for our final question, because it is going to be deep.
Yeah, I think you're right. And for those avid listeners, Ben, we focus almost all of our messages on we want more money. We want to create higher margins. We want to do all of these things. And then we threw in a little sneaky episode at the beginning of the fall talking about retraining your brain with Pastor Ashley. And that episode blew up. We didn't have that kind of exposure to one of our episodes in a long time. So I'm excited, really, really excited about this episode, because it's going to translate to those assets. It's going to translate into positive wealth earning opportunities, because ultimately, if we can figure this part of our lives out, one, we might produce more productive relationships, more focused and targeted business planning. If one of the quotes that we're going to get to that I really like that you said is, you got to figure yourself out first before you can create the plan, the strategy for everything else as far as that goes. So when you meet with a client, when you talk to somebody about your coaching, how do you start? Where do we even start when we want to go about this? What are some things we need to know or consider?
It's an interesting question. It can go a couple different ways, but most of the time when someone is stuck in a rut, or another way that I describe it is in a roundabout, that the life just keeps getting the same results no matter which exit they take. It's like the Truman Show, if you've seen that, where the guy goes in the roundabout, no matter where he takes, he comes back into the same one. When your life is in that set of sequences where it repeats itself, where no matter what you try, no matter what you throw it at the wall, you're always back. There is a part of your life that's a pattern. Part of the first step is, as a coach, is identifying that pattern and understanding how to interrupt it. The problem with what most people try, and I tried this in the wrong order. For me, in my life, in my process, I tried and got really excited about where I could go, which is often a lot of businesses. Why we do anything is like, man, that's amazing. I want that. But the problem is if we don't know where we are and how we got there, it's often difficult to get where we want to go. And I use the analogy of Google. Google Maps is a powerful tool. It can take you anywhere in the world, but it has two inherent flaws. One, if you don't know a destination, can't get you there. And two, if you don't know a starting point, it can't get you there either. And those two important points is adequate or needed to get where you want to go. So when someone comes into my world, I'm helping them understand first where they are, just kind of getting a lay of the land and realizing some of these early patterns. Like what you mentioned, generational trauma is one of those things that I dive into. Those generational patterns that we don't even realize were passed down to us that we're repeating. And oftentimes these are just something that was imprinted on us that are now on the lens as how we look through our life. And it filters everything through that. We don't realize that we have sometimes these cataracts that are distorting our vision. Maybe we think we have 20/20, but we don't. I mean, one of the easiest things that often comes up is I can't understand why I always lose my temper with my kids and I'm always yelling at them. Like no matter how hard I try, I just can't break it. And in a very simple coaching call that I was on once, we simply identified this was the pattern that you learned when you were younger of how your dad reacted to life. And realizing as a dad yourself, you're just reliving the pattern that was implanted with you of how life works. For better or for worse, that's how you learned it. And just bringing some awareness to it allows you to almost get past it. So just pausing for a little bit, looking at where you are, looking at that lay of the land, and doing some excavating, you can understand how you got there. The other thing I'll even add that a lot of times, maybe if you're building a business and you keep wondering why you haven't built what you wanted or you haven't gotten the results or the profit, think of a skyscraper. Manhattan is a skyscraper city because of the bedrock underneath. When you're building a skyscraper, if you do not properly excavate to that bedrock, your skyscraper will not make it. Most people start building skyscrapers before ever excavating down to bedrock. And I often talk about this idea of home. I mentioned I'm military veteran dad, that I think of home as a place inside. That it's this foundation that you build everything from. It's a cornerstone. And it has to be rock solid. And if you can't get to there, if you don't know where it is, anything you build is going to have a corner of the building sagging. And you keep wondering why every time you get to the 20th story, it collapses. Because that bedrock, those things that are in your mind and in your psyche, in your story, keep eroding what you keep building and aren't strong enough because you haven't removed them and excavated through your life.
So does this episode that's labeled The Business of Fatherhood apply to mothers?
The same, essentially, process of generational trauma, things passed down. Any of these patterns, whether we had a dumpster fire for a parent or whether sometimes there are things where even when we have the best parents, there are still things the best parents can still pass down. There's no obvious awareness of their own that then can pass on and create a limiting belief, for example, of what is possible. I'll give you a great example. Growing up on a farm, just because of the nature of the farm, it always felt like that life wasn't on our side. That every year, it was the year that the hay wasn't going to be able to make it. That we weren't going to be able to have 4 crops. That something was going to happen and we weren't going to make it to the end. It always felt like brimstone and fire. Even though, the irony, I've often even heard it as my dad in the last few years, like, would be doing first cutting hay, and he's like, man, if it doesn't rain, this will be the last hay we cut. And I'm like, Dad, you've got 40 years of memories to know that, like, it works out. Like, it, but still, there's these random moments of thinking like that I learned that life isn't abundant, that life is always scarce, that you don't know what tomorrow is going to be. And you don't know what tomorrow is going to be. But I can tell you, growing up on a farm, where we didn't always have everything and you didn't know what the weather was going to be and you were based on the market, whether you got profit or not sometimes, that's not necessarily fully translatable into regular business. It's a unique experience that was passed down to me that I've still to this day working through to change how I view money and how I work with money and how I can leverage it and what are different things that I can do with it. Like that, for me, wasn't really negative or positive, but it has shaped how I saw the world. So mom, dad, doesn't really matter. Even in the best scenarios, how you grew up has changed how you see the world. And understanding how you see the world, that's directly reflected of how you see your life.
Tanner, when I'm looking at that, thinking of repeating the process, whether it's a kid and how you grew up or whatever. I think of everybody that has a dad that says, well, we've always done it that way, and that's why we're doing it.
Yeah, and I go back and I like to always reflect in these shows on myself to hopefully give our listeners the permission to do that with themselves, to be vulnerable during this. But I know that my relationship with money is because of my childhood, because of the way I was raised. I know that the way I treat it, the way I earn it, the way that I spend it or invest it is based upon that childhood. And secondly, it took a long time, and I'm still not there at all at fixing this. But one of the other big things that I've struggled with is the permission to take a day off. Because as a farm kid, there's always something to do on that farm. Even when there's nothing to do, there's always something to do.
Always something broken. Something still held together with twine.
Yes. We've been we haven't paid attention to the grove in years. Now it's time to go clear it out because everything else is done.
Or that fence line has too many weeds.
Yes. There's always something to do. So even now in my life, here, that's why this podcast is so easy for me to do, because it's just more work. I enjoy the hell out of it, just like I do a lot of the farm jobs. But that was something else that I still struggle with, is the permission to not do something, to not be working.
So how do you come home, as you say? When I think of my dad is a Marine and he's got a 3-foot world, and it's whatever's in front of his 3-foot world at that time. How do you pass the 3-foot world?
In the context of understanding that there's more, or like outside of your head?
Yeah.
Expand on that a little bit more.
Like coming home, it was always whatever the mission was in front of him. We're building this today. We're farming this today. We're doing this. And so the kids didn't get the attention. It was whatever the mission for the day was to solve that mission. Is that kind of what you saw when you came home, that you still had ideas and goals in your head that you were doing, that you didn't, that the fatherhood wasn't there?
Agreed. And I would say the same thing for me. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I adopted the standard American dream: get a job, start a family, get a house. And that's everything that I was doing. I was going to school. But the problem was the pursuit of a mission, it didn't get me what I wanted. I had everything on the books that everybody should say I had, but I wasn't happy. And I think this is something with a generational shift, is that the generation of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was just a larger ability to swallow things down, or you didn't often know all that was possible because there just wasn't access to the information that we have now. And it was just easier to deal with things. And there wasn't also the safe place for your conversations, or the ability as a dad to say that you're not okay, as there is now, like the mental health crisis we have for men, or the stigma, the dogma that can go with that. But I would also say the dad that just focuses on the mission of the day is almost trying to define their life and meaning by what they do. And that's also the crux of what we've been told as men, where we were valued. For the last 100 years, since men have been going into factories, we have been told that's where our place is in the world. Our place is in the wars, our place is in the factories, that it's not at the home. And that message was bought for the last 100 years. But as a stay-at-home dad, I can tell you I have just as much capacity to love my kids and take care of this place. And not to discredit stay-at-home moms, but that I also have that capacity just like they do. And it's not an or statement that a dad has to be at work and mom has to be at home. But often it's just being able to redefine yourself in a different way. And most men require themselves to be defined by work. And that often creates the sticky point where they're not able to let go of that, because that's how they define themselves. And part of the coach of excavating is defining yourself on who you are, not by what you do. Because like I said, what you do is important, but what you leave behind is 10 times more important. And that's a different mindset of what you're willing to work through.
So you, I hate using the term unpack, but you unpacked a lot during what you just said. And I want to kind of try and tear into it a little bit. Culturally, we are in a much different time right now. Our listeners have the cultural weight around them, for lack of better terms, that there is an expectation to be a better dad, to be a better parent. And you hear a lot of times it being thrown around work-life balance. Work-life balance doesn't mean a 50-50 split between time spent, right?
Correct. And it also means it's more of an integration. It's not really a balance. it's also like I also never underestimate like where my focus needs to be is where my feet are. That's easier said than done. But where your feet are is generally the moment that matters most. It's the one that either you're in front of your kids, maybe as they tell you that they had a bad day, or the one that you're in front of the combine because it broke. That's where my mind is supposed to be.
So
I don't do this well.
don't do what?
I don't do the mind is where your feet are. I don't do that well at all. I mean, I'm here right now, but there are all kinds of times where I'm standing in front of my kids.
Oh,
I don't have a clue what they just
especially
said.
if you're your own business owner, because your mind just never stops. You can't shut it off when you go home because you're still the boss, the whatever, farmers, entrepreneurs all day long. I wonder though, like my dad worked railroad his whole life, and so he was gone all the time. And my wife tells me, she says, well, you need to get the kids ball games, or you need to get that. Well, I don't remember my dad being at all that stuff, and he wasn't, but I'm okay with that. I didn't resent him. That's what my wife says. Your kids are going to resent you. I don't know that they will. What it instilled was a work ethic that, hey, you have to work, you have to provide, you have to whatever. So are we making a bunch of softies in the next generation that they aren't going to know how to work because they want to be cuddled or coddled rather?
I mean, I can't answer that very clearly, Ben. Maybe you can take that. It's not like we're instilling to work less.
Yeah.
It's Ben's mission is a way to help you dad better.
Yeah.
Almost lead better, right, Ben?
Agreed. And I would also agree and disagree with what you said, that there is some level of example that you set as a dad of what matters and how life works. You get up, you put your boots on, and you get to work. But there's also a component of, well, you might not resent your dad, and your kids might not resent you. There is a unknown of what more your kids could be had dad watched you. Because oftentimes it's that moment when you are in the stands, they're looking at you. Here's the thought that I can tell you I've had, and I've just kind of unpacked this through some coaching that I did this year. This idea and understanding and deepening down more that the real you matters. The real you matters. And when people can do that, and your father and your mother are the best mirrors to enhance or detract that the real you mattered. And there's a large group of people in society that operate with a belief that the real you doesn't matter. And if people don't have that belief, this is in the work that I was doing, this is one of the core beliefs at the bottom of our soul, that's a gated switch. That if you have a belief that the real you doesn't matter, it turns off your ability to express fully who you are and to let your full soul be an outward expression of you on the surface. Because you're told that the real you doesn't matter and that I have to be whatever the world tells me to be. Because there's also a narrative where it's not about just work, it's about purposeful work. It's the right kind of work. It's the idea that what I do for a living is nothing related to farming. I don't follow my dad's footsteps, but I can tell you breaking and having permission to do something different than what I grew up with, that was like a 5-year journey for me to grow through, and like to recognize that like I can be myself and that's good and it's okay. So it's more about what is possible than it is about, in some cases, doing destruction. Now, if you're an absent dad and you're never there, there's different moments where, and I'll give you a great analogy where often I use this analogy with connecting with my kids now when they're younger, is when their kids are younger, your kids are testing you. Are you there for the little things? Are you there when I had a bad day on the playground? Are you there when I'm frustrated emotionally at these girls that are making fun of me? Because later in life, when it's the big things, they remembered whether you were there for the small things. And maybe your daughter's at a party and she doesn't feel comfortable. But if you haven't created a bond where she knows you're going to be there 100% of the time, or that you can be a safe person to talk to about hard things, she might not be the first call you give. And maybe she stays at that party longer than she feels safe to. So I take all of this, and that's kind of one of my primary rules that I live by is right now, how I show up is an example of how I want them to trust me later when it's a big thing. And often teenage years are hell because they don't have good relationships when they're younger. And teenagers don't trust their parents to tell them what's going on because they weren't there when it didn't matter. So why would they be here when it does? Now, that's kind of a harsh way, but oftentimes when you're talking about fatherhood, there's always different angles you can talk about it. But talking almost in the worst case scenarios allows you to engineer it back to a safe place where you are and understanding what you can do today where your feet are to lead yourself through some of those different conversations.
I agree 100% there that you build that relationship. Heck, half the classes that our kids go to the same school, Tanner and I, that they put out is basically saying, know everything about your kid's life, not everything, but be involved such that they'll trust. You got to build that trust at an early spot, otherwise they're not going to trust you later. So
just to evolve off of this, because there's only so many hours in a day. And to be there for the little things, you got to be around. You got to be accessible. I'm not saying you have to be in the house all the time. You don't have to be there when they get off the bus. But maybe it's them working with you, whichever it is. But we're in a culture to where it's acceptable. It's almost encouraged to just be busy. How much is that?
Busyness is almost a disease. It's an excuse that everybody says, I'm just busy, and everybody accepts it. So it's like the perpetual thing that just keeps everybody in the rabbit hole of like, I'm busy, but I don't act. I mean, think of COVID. COVID slowed the entire world down, and everybody was like, man, I used the analogy of, it was like everybody woke up to the frat party the next day and like, was this trash here the entire time? Like, it's a freaking mess.
Right.
Well, you were just so busy, you couldn't notice all of it.
Yeah.
Often the problem now is everybody just sped their life back up and turned it back on. But that's what I noticed. And I was, during that time, I had just lost my job 2 months ago. So I was also rewiring my life. I was a stay-at-home dad. My wife's world was crazy. Where my feet were was sitting there with my kid's iPad. Like, there could be lots of different things that I did later. And even, I didn't think of this earlier on, but one of the mindsets that I had in that moment is when I'm 50, looking back, I'm never going to wish that I ran out and got a job or ran out and did different things differently. I'm only going to want more time with my kids. When I'm 50, that is the only thing that I'm going to want back, and it's going to be gone. And if there's one thing that they tell you is between 0 and 10 are the ages you want back the most. They go by the fastest, but most of us are asleep at the wheel, and we don't realize it till it's too late, and we wait till we have grandkids to spoil them and spend time with them. But those times between 0 and 10, I can be a CEO of something big, or I can conquer the world when I'm 50. But right now, when I'm 38, I can be dad. And this is where my feet are. This is where my greatest influence, legacy-wise, is on my kids. And there's always more time to do bigger things in business. But right now, my kids are at an age where they want to spend time with me. There's going to be a time where they don't. And it's annoying sometimes knowing all this, because there's moments where you're like, just go to bed. But then there's times where, when your kids call from upstairs, like, Daddy, can you tuck me in one more time? And you're like, oh my God, it's been three times this week already. Give me a break. I just want to sit and watch Netflix or something. But the mindset there is, and this applies to almost all the moments, no one's going to tell you when it's the last one. Yeah. And just like that, it's over. That could be the very last time they ever asked to be tucked in and you didn't want to do it.
Yeah, we're not talking death. It just could be the last time they ask for it.
Correct. It's not death, but it's just the last time, and then they're on to something else. Where that was the last time they asked to play checkers with you. You might just say you're busy, but that could be the very last time. And, well, if I would have known it was last time, I would have said yes. But you don't know. That's why being where your feet are is so important, because that's the only place you have influence.
And everybody that you talk to that is busy, and then they say, oh, yeah, I'll be on the school board. And you just go, well, how could this person that is so busy have time for that? No, you make time. Mm-hmm. You make time to be busy where you want to. So how do we get our brains to switch from, I'm doing that for somebody else. Yes, I'm doing that for my community. I'm giving back to my church. I've got a group of friends. But where do you reframe it in your brain that is family time? To become busy for your family?
I think it comes back to, you have to do an audit of why you're doing it. A lot of people's desires externally are to fill holes on the inside. That there was something in the assembling of their life and their mind that got misplaced. And what we're doing, either on school board, is for status or influence or to be liked. And oftentimes it's realizing why we're doing it, pulling back and be like, I don't need that for my kids to love me. But most people are living an external life without doing the excavating work of why they're doing it. I can tell you so many patterns in my life that I was only doing them because I needed to feel a certain way. Like there's an analogy that I've learned through working with Eastern philosophies is he'll ask you, are you in there? And the question is kind of weird. Like, are you in there? I don't know. What do you mean? Like, it's a weird question. The idea is, are you in there? How do you know you're in there? Like, where are you in there? And the idea is you are in there, even outside your mind. There is this consciousness that's in there. And the second is, what's it like in there? This question is powerful because most people say it's very uncomfortable, it's high anxiety, and I'm always feeling like I'm not enough. Not enough. This is another one that can plague people. And then this realization that realize everything you do in life is an attempt to make it okay in there. Everything you do in externally, your world, your purpose, it's trying to make it feel okay in there. And that realization, kind of pulling back the magic trick of how your mind works, you can realize like that I'll go into what I've been working on this year, being okay around others when they're not. Because for me, I had this codependency to try to help people in many ways because of what I do even, that I was like, if I could leave you a little better, then I'll feel a little bit better. Mm-hmm. That's not how life works. I need to be okay, perfectly being okay, without ever saying anything to anybody that may not be okay. And most of the things that I was doing was codependent in that category. So like that's probably a lot deeper of an answer you wanted, but the idea of understanding what matters most, what am I going to want when I'm 50? What am I going to wish I did when I'm going to be 50? Could I do this later? Another good example is your legacy isn't a business that you leave behind or 200 acres. Your legacy is what your kids say about you after you're gone. Will that be positive? If you're standing and able to witness your funeral as a ghost, what will your kids say up there in front of all the people in the church about you, about how you live life, about your relationship with them?
Right.
This idea is a little bit morbid, but as Franklin Covey says, start with the end in mind. And I can't tell you, it's annoying how many times that advice hits home and comes into play in business, life, and all. Like that end in mind allows you to wire back, like, you know what? It doesn't matter. I don't need to be on the school board to create influence, because even Billy Graham has said that I've talked to stadiums of 60,000 people, and he didn't have the best relationship with his kids. And he was like, I could have had a greater impact on this world had I just spent that same amount of time with my kids.
Sure. And
realizing that, and just pulling back the mirage of what our American society tells us we need to do. And it's this also realizing that like Target wants you to think you go to Target every weekend because you need it. You don't need to go to Target. It's just good consumers are in patterns.
Right.
And when you're in a pattern, you spend. It's like that just perpetually keeps you chasing whatever to do to make money because you need to go to Target next week. No, you don't. You can spend that time with your kids playing a board game. And it's very, like, I might be saying this in a complex way, but at the same time, where your feet are might be as simple as playing a game of checkers, playing a board game, listening to your kids for 10 minutes. You can change your entire kid's emotions in 10 minutes just by playing trains with them. Like, I often give this simple advice. If you go up to your kids next time you got 10 minutes, like, hey, dad's got 10 minutes. What do you want to do? Like, you could completely change their day because you are their hero. You just showed up and said, you got 10 minutes and we can do anything together. You've crushed it. Like, that can be the powerful moment of being dad that day.
We've all heard the story of, the kid that comes up to dad and asks him how much he makes an hour. And then the kid saves up the money to bring it to dad and say, all right, dad, here's the $25 that you make an hour, and I want an hour of your time. We don't ever want to get to a position like that, but to flip the script and say, no, here, I got 10 minutes, I got an hour, I got 20, Saturday afternoon is yours, is completely flipping this. But everything we've talked about here is extremely impactful. We've talked fatherhood and motherhood. What if our listeners don't have kids? how can they have an impact? How can they take the message today and apply that? Is it nieces and nephews? Is it neighborhood? How does this episode mean anything to someone who doesn't have children?
I think there's a component that I learned a while back. I think it was during COVID. I only have 3 kids, but during COVID, I was often caught in the neighborhood with 7 kids behind me on a bicycle. That other kids were out there because whatever, their families didn't want to do it. And I would get people knocking on my door like, hey, are you going on a bike ride tonight? I'm like, I don't know yet. We just finished dinner. Like, it's too early to tell. That if you truly want to change the world, there's this formula that I always say. Start with your neighborhood, then go to your community. And once you've impacted your community, then you can go to your county, state, and higher up. But your greatest influence is in your neighborhood and understanding how you could be an impact in those neighborhoods. Never underestimate the power of providing visibility to another human being that they mattered. Like, simple example is you never know what people are going through at any point you run into throughout the grocery store. And you never know what it took for someone to put their pants on that day. That maybe putting their pants on that day was the hardest decision they came to. And because you don't know what they're going through, compassion is often the best tool towards anyone in life, whether they are maybe ready to receive it or not. But in order to give love, this was something also I had to learn. In order to unconditionally love the world in a very positive way, you have to first learn to unconditionally love yourself. And that requires you to learn to love the good and the bad, the ugly of your life. Like, the ugly parts, this part always gets a good hit, especially even with farming, is part of my story is learning and coaching is taking your pain and converting it to a purpose. And Proverbs 14:4 says it beautifully, and I won't quote it exactly, but essentially it says, where there's oxen in life, there's life, and when there's no oxen, there is no life. A mentor of mine translated that and essentially says it takes a lot of manure to make good soil, and great soil bears great fruit. Understanding whatever is in your life, pain, no matter where you're at, whether you have kids or not, your pain can have a purpose, and it can either be dead weight holding you back, or it can be jet fuel like I'm doing here with my message today. Your pain can have a purpose, but you need to work it in the soil, and you could theoretically plant a tree, whether you have a family or not, that provides shade to a family in the future that you never even met. But because of the richness of your soil, that tree changed their life forever. So understanding you have a greater influence than you think, but often, again, the excavating work, if you do the inner work, you can get to this place of peace and acceptance where what you give to the world isn't going from a place where you want something back. It's in a place where I'm giving it because I have abundantly enough to give, which again is a little bit deep for maybe most people, but that's ultimately where that journey that I've been on and the place that I tried to sit on as a father and through just daily life of what life gives me.
Pretty awesome, Ben. What are we missing? What else is there that we haven't unpacked already?
Good question. I would say part that we haven't unpacked is understanding maybe what's at stake. Because fatherhood is this simple thing. And one of the reasons why I've hung my hat on it, and one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about it, and one of the reasons why I often maybe feel like I'm kicking someone while they're down, or getting them down and like making them feel a certain way, because it's important to get through some of this BS. Almost, I feel from my perspective, 100% of the issues we have in society, you name it, I'll be able to tie it back to the root cause of fatherlessness homes in America. That it's something almost like 60 or 70%, crazy numbers, of kids are growing up without a father in their home. That aspect of not having male leadership impacts ways we don't even know. Your daughters will go out into the world to marry the man you were. You are a man with a shotgun at the door, it's because you set the bar too low and you're scared who she's going to bring home. If you set the bar high of how a man treats a woman, how he models himself, she will go out into the world to find a version of you. She may not get it right in the first try, but she will always come to the conclusion, this guy's not my dad. Your son will understand what's possible in your life based on how much you thought was possible in your life. I recently heard this said that like we often tell kids they can be anything they want. Well, what about the day your kids hear you say that and you say back to dad, well, then if I can, then why didn't you? Did you stop in the corporate ladder? Did you stop where you could go? Did you get stuck? Did you become in a rut? If I can have everything I want, why didn't you? These are the hard questions that I dive into and why I make this so important for my life. Because what is possible is anything. And fathers have the ability to either breathe oxygen into the furnace and create a stronger product because of it and breathe that furnace up so that kid goes into the world with an understanding of who they are and understanding how they can impact it. Or the opposite, are you the CO2 that stuffs it out? All of it comes back to fatherhood, in my opinion. And over the last 100 years, father's role has been degraded. In the last, I would say 15, there's been a massive effort to redefine the role of a father in a kid's life and what is possible when a dad shows up and helps your kids understand that the real you matters.
That's a pretty good bow on the conversation. I mean, there's so much more that we can cover with you. I think we just need to dive into a little bit of a summary. I'm going to handle that, Dave. And then I'm really looking forward to your answer on the question that we've been asking everybody. What does success look like to you? So hold on to that. Think about it. And I'm going to steal some things from your website during this that we didn't get said or didn't get covered, because everybody needs to go check out your podcast. And I'll let you plug that here at the end. People need to look up what you've got going on. For example, some of his blog titles, Dave, Breaking the Cycle. Kids don't need us to be perfect. Stop being a spectator. Life happens for us, not to us. Is your dad proud of you? But there's other things that I picked up. You know, how can you, as a dad, lead a child through life if you yourself don't yet know where you're going? That goes right back to the comment that Ben just made. You know, what does that look like to you? If you say they can be anything they want to be, then why are you holding back? Mm-hmm. And then most dads have been told how to make a living, but very few of us have been told or taught how to live itself. So those are all stolen things from Ben's website and what he's got going on. So I'm excited to get to his answer. But listeners, today we're talking about the business of fatherhood. We were doing a little emotional excavating for you today. This doesn't just apply to dads. It can also apply to mothers. Our goal is to interrupt a pattern, whether that's a good pattern, a bad pattern, just a pattern in general in which you mirrored your life of. We're going to get down to the bedrock so we can build up really strong buildings and structures in our lives, the home that we want to come home to as being a father. The one that's going to stick with me is focus is where your feet are. We brought that up a couple of times today, and that one's really going to hit home for me, because there's times to where even when I'm standing having a conversation with Dave, I'm not here. You know, I'm very thankful that I have been here this entire episode. This has been great. I've been hanging on every single word, and that has a whole different impact than some of the other recordings that we've done. You think about who you are and realize that the real you matters, but is the real you showing? It's not something we can fix today. It's a journey throughout this process. Are you going to be there for the little things for your family, for your kids? Because that translates to what big things they call you on in the future. How you show up will work well in the times ahead of you. You can start small. Start with your family. If you want influence, then move to your neighborhood and then your community. Build that structure up. And ultimately, this is all going to affect your business and your farm, because if you are confident in who you are and you know what value you bring, that's going to help power your business and your farm forward. So, Ben, what does success look like to you?
I'm going to do a couple different things as I was thinking about the answer. And I first want to talk about where I first learned this. I think 4 years ago, I watched the movie Coco that Disney came out with. And there was a part of this story with the Day of the Dead and remembrance that it really never hit me that these pictures are required for you to be remembered. And if you're not remembered, you can't cross the marigolds to be visited by your family. Mm-hmm. And it left me with this question: when is a veteran forgotten? When does your name no longer mean anything? And it hit me that a veteran is only forgotten when no one repeats your name. And part of that process is people have to know who you are. They need to know how you lived. They need to know your stories. They need to be safe with you to understand those. And there has to be something worth remembering. Are you building something worth remembering? Do your kids know you? Is there wisdom that 200 years from now, someone's going to be like, Grandpa Kilroy used to say this, and we still use it? Are there things in that category that well past your time in being 8 feet under, that something lives on, not because of what you left behind from a wealth, but because you left something worth remembering? And to me, this is something relationship with my kids. My success is directly proportional to how well my kids know me, how well, whether I don't make it a week from now or I have another 40 years, however long I have, do they know me enough that who I am and how I lived lives through them in a way that keeps getting passed on? Because oftentimes you might be an alcoholic. And I can tell you that there are many probably stories that I've heard where the alcoholic is the one remembered 3 generations beyond, because everybody's been trying not to be like that person.
Right.
I'm on the other side of that. I want to be remembered for how I lived, how I treated people, the way I lived, and the wisdom I left behind. I often talk about anchor memories with your kids, that there should be a place that your kids can go long after you're gone, that they can ask you a question and feel like they can be in touch with the wisdom that you would give them. Because if you can create that, and if they can trust that, your kids will never alone. There will always be this place that anyone in your family could go visit you emotionally. Again, coming home emotionally to understand who you are, how you lived. And if I can pass that down worthy enough to be remembered, mic drop, and I'm out.
That's success.
That's huge. Okay, so how do people find you? Where do they go find what Ben is all about?
BenCoy.com is my website. It's got the podcast, The Business of Fatherhood there. It's also got a link to the Military Veteran Dad podcast. Both are on all the platforms. Military Veteran Dad, I'm no longer publishing episodes, but there's over 3 years of episodes and content there. So plenty of content if you are a military veteran dad trying to work through some of the stories from the military and understanding some of the things that can go with the stigma with that. Check out that one. If you are just like me and an everyday dad, check out The Business of Fatherhood for a short hit of a mindset, a shift, a thought of how I've lived my life or what I was struggling, because I lay my life to bear on these podcasts in full open fashion of what I've been going through, what I've grown through, what I'm struggling with. Because life doesn't stop happening. This is why this work matters. Life doesn't just show up and stop one day. I've mastered it. It stops being hard. No, it still gives you. I've lost 2 friends this fall, one to suicide on Thanksgiving. Life doesn't stop happening. You have to be ready to handle it. And that's why this work is so important. And Business of Fatherhood is why I put so much time into that, because all of this matters and the work matters. And my life is still evolving. I'm still learning and struggling with different things as the day goes on. So BenCoy.com, there is a free Design Your Legacy call. If your legacy isn't something you've been thinking about or you don't understand what it could be, there's a free call up at the top there that jump on. I have a process to walk you through to help you get out of the rut, to see where your life could be if you put some effort towards it, and understanding how you can clean up maybe if you have a wasteland behind you.
I like this. Dave, what's our challenge?
Ask your kids, if you got 10 minutes, what do you want to do?
I like that.
You'll be surprised. Give them the keys to the bus. Especially the younger they are, the simpler it will be.
Right.
You don't have to have a great example of work in life. You are not counted at work to have all the great ideas. Same thing applies at home. You don't need to have every idea. Your kids can be the keys to the bus, and they can drive the bus as well.
And I want one bonus question. 30 seconds. We've got kids. How do we start now? I don't care how old our listeners' kids are. What do we start with now? Is it Dave's challenge? 30 seconds. What do we do first?
Tonight, at the dinner table, remember that dinner isn't something that people have a lot. It's one of the lost traits outside of farming. I would say farming maybe is the example. Ask your kids what was the best part of their day and what was the worst part. Bring visibility to who they are every day, and you'll make a difference.
I love it. Listeners, thank you so much for hanging out little out of the box topic for us, but nothing that is any less important. Ben, long time coming. I appreciate it. We'll do it again. I promise.
Appreciate it. Thank you both
Yes.
for the opportunity to share my story.
Thank you for your service, and listeners, until next time, have a good one.